All right, so my thank yous to those of you who pulled yourself away from lunch and away from the sunshine. We're going to get started again, and we're going to talk in this session about some groundwater efforts that involve engineering. So it's kind of a different theme here. We're going to start with Amy Steinfeld, who is an attorney with Brownstein, Hyatt, Farber, Schreck. And they are a sponsor, so thank you. And Amy is an old friend, a student here many years ago. Not many. I saw your picture on the composites down there. If you go down toward the bathrooms and see the composite photos, you can find Amy. I think it's 2005. Mm-hmm. There, see. So welcome back. Amy's been working on a variety of issues, mainly in California, including, this is the quote you had in your bio, the permitting and development of controversial water projects. And that just kind of made me chuckle, as opposed to the non-controversial water projects that are out there. But apparently you like conflict, and I did not know that about you. Okay. One of those controversial projects is the Cadiz project, which I will confess I haven't paid much attention to over the last several years, just because I thought it would never happen. I didn't know you were working on these, but it might happen. So we're going to talk about it.
Okay. Thank you, Doug. It's so good to be back here. I really
first page of your notes.
I really owe my career to Professor Getches. I studied underneath him, and he had some great advice when I graduated. He said, "Go west. Water law in California is a total mess. Go figure it out." And I can't say I've figured it all out, but I am so grateful to be in a field that's forever fascinating. And there's so many, California water law and policy is just an incredible field to be in. California just hit 40 million people this year. So you can imagine the water crisis that we are facing, both between the long-term drought and then also our growing population. So who here has heard about the Cadiz project? Okay, a handful of you. This project is a groundwater management and supply project in the Mojave Desert. It's a very innovative and also a very controversial project. And the reason I think it is so controversial is anytime you try to take water out of the desert and bring it to coastal California, it raises some red flags. The second piece is there's a private sector involvement in this project, which of course is always controversial. So I'm here to explain the project, talk to you about the steps that we've gone through and why I think this is really a model public-private partnership. And I do see this project moving forward in the next 18 months. This title that Doug gave me, I think, is kind of tongue-in-cheek because the project's actually been in the works for about 10 years. So a little bit about the company. Cadiz is a natural resources company that was founded in the 80s, and they actually use NASA data to locate this massive underground aquifer in the desert. They amassed about 45,000 acres of private land holdings, most of which are contiguous, and they've spent the past 20 years doing organic farming out there. It's a really surreal place to visit. So it's along Route 66, if you've ever been out there, near the very, very, very tiny town of Amboy that I think has 2 people currently. And you can see in the distance there's some mountains. Now these are not the 14ers, but for the Mojave Desert, they are actually very high. They're about 7,000 feet, the highest mountains in the Mojave Desert. So just to further orientate you can see here, I'm going to point this out. Cadiz is right here, 200 miles northeast of LA, and this entire yellow area is the Metropolitan Water District Service Area. Any guesses on how many people actually reside in the area, pretty much from Santa Barbara, where I live, to San Diego? There's about 20 million of us. And as you know, this is a very arid area. So what this project is proposing to do is to move water from the Mojave Desert to hook into the Colorado River Aqueduct and move it to Southern California. Now, I hate to mention the Colorado River Aqueduct. I understand the politics. I went to school here. But this is how we Californians take some of your water through this conveyance pipeline. So this project's going to be implemented in 2 phases. And phase 1 is the conservation and supply piece. So the plan is to intercept about 32,000 acre-feet of water before it evaporates and to put that water to beneficial use. This will create a new public water supply for about 400,000 people throughout Southern California. And there's also an in-lieu storage component, which means that, for example, if a water agency buys, say, 5,000 acre-feet of this supply for annual use, during wet years, it can actually carry over the storage, keep it in the basin for use during dry years. So it provides some flexibilities for these water agencies. The infrastructure that's required for phase one is the construction of a well field. There's about 10 existing wells in the area. It's going to be expanded from between 20 and 30, 40 wells. There's also going to be a natural gas power source that will power the pumps. And then the main piece of infrastructure is a 43-mile pipeline with an existing active railroad right-of-way, which will avoid adverse impacts. So what's important to know about this project is this is really Cadiz 2.0. The first project proposed to move the water through the desert in an undisturbed area, which of course is not ideal. So Cadiz 2.0 is proposing to move the water down through an active right-of-way that actually is used currently and to co-locate the 84-inch water pipeline along this existing right-of-way. So here's a better idea. You can kind of see the infrastructure here. So the orange is the 43-mile proposed pipeline, and then it'll tie in right here to the Colorado River Aqueduct and send the water down here. Phase two is the storage component. And the storage component proposes to move water into the basin for storage purposes. I think we can all agree that in California and elsewhere, we all need additional storage, especially due to climate change and the fact that we're seeing more, especially in California, these atmospheric rivers. So instead of receiving our precipitation over about a 15-day period, we're receiving most of our rain over a 3-day period. So we need more ways to store this water for use, during the dry period. California essentially is in a drought every year from March until November. So we need to store that water. And storing it underground is great, especially out here because you have an area where there's no overlying industry. You have a very clean aquifer. The other piece that's very interesting about the storage component is that it is proposing to take an existing natural gas pipeline, and I don't know if this is being done elsewhere in the West, but what the project is proposing to do is actually to bring water down from the State Water Project through this existing natural gas pipeline and bring it into the aquifer for storage. So this project would actually be the first project to connect the State Water Project, which is primarily Delta supplies, with the Colorado River Aqueduct. So the idea behind this, it would be a great way to add flexibility to the system during wet years to store additional water for use during dry years. So to really understand, everyone says, well, what do you mean this is a conservation project? So to understand the terminology, it's really important to understand the geology and hydrology of this project. Here's an overview of the watershed. It's a very large watershed, about the size of Rhode Island, and there's about 17 to 34 million acre-feet of water in the aquifer. And just for context, this is about the size of Lake Mead, which is the largest surface water in the reservoir in the nation. The water quality in this area is very good, very low TDS, about 300 parts per million. It's been tested for every constituent, and it does not exceed any of the MCLs. In addition, this area you can see, it's probably easier to see on the next page, but so this is the watershed, the outline, and you have these very high mountains up here. So what happens is a lot of precipitation slowly runs down here, and Cadiz is situated really at the base of the watershed. And eventually the water ends up down here where it evaporates out of two existing dry lakes, Bristol and Cadiz Dry Lake. I love this graphic because I think it's really easy to see what the project is proposing to do. So this well field essentially would intercept the water before it flowed into the dry lakes. And there's like a brine interface here. So as you get closer to the dry lakes, what happens is the TDS increases. And so once you're actually right here, the TDS is about 10 times the salinity levels of the Pacific Ocean. So these wells would intercept the water before it ended up evaporating out of the dry lakes, and it would essentially reverse the flow. So this is called hydraulic control. There was extensive studies done, and the research was done by hydrologists, geologists over a several year period to really evaluate the feasibility of this project. Now, as I mentioned, there was an original project that was approved in 2000. It was approved by the federal government, and Metropolitan Water District at that time decided not to go forward with that project, so it was never constructed. So in 2008, my firm was hired by the company Cadiz to basically kind of do additional studies and see if this project was feasible. So there was numerous technical studies done addressing every issue. There was some previous concerns expressed about this project. So Everything was redone, updated. There was a new model that was used using the USGS ModFlow 2010 model. And so additional field studies were done to determine what the safe yield was. Now, I think we all know kind of the million-dollar question with any of these projects is how much water can you safely take out? So the model demonstrated that the safe yield was 32,000 acre-feet. In addition, Cadiz also paid to have what I call Mars rovers, these little sensors put at the dry lakes. There was thousands and thousands of test points, and that data, which was actual field data showing the evaporation rates, corroborated this number of 32,000. However, there were several opponents that believed that the recharge was heavily overestimated. So in order to look at the effects of pumping, even under these worst-case scenarios, there were several models that were run, including at 16,000 acre-feet, and then assuming worst-case scenario that there would only be 5,000 acre-feet of water flowing down this watershed. So the model determined that under all of these scenarios, there would be no impact on the desert environment. So I would be remiss, I'm at the law school, and to not talk about the legal framework. But I think the main point, as you know, most of you know, in California, we have a dual system of water rights. So we have appropriative rights and then overlying or riparian rights. And so in this instance, because Cadiz is going to be moving water off-site, it's considered an appropriation. And here in California, that can be done as long as it's surplus to the needs of overlying owners. The only overlying owners in the area are basically existing salt mining companies. This area you probably saw from the map is very sparsely populated. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about the permitting. So CEQA is often recognized as the most stringent environmental set of rules in the nation. So this project had to undergo CEQA review. And there was an 18-month public process, a 100-day public comment period, multiple public meetings. And in July 2012, the EIR was certified by the lead agency. In California, you have one public agency who decides to take on the project. In this case, it was Santa Margarita Water District. They were playing the biggest role in this project, and they were actually purchasing the most water. They're going to be purchasing about 10 to 15,000 acre-feet of the supply. Because a lot of people don't trust what people consider to be kind of company science or industry science, there was also a 13-member group peer review panel, or sort of a technical advisory panel formed to look at this project and determine what could be done differently. So this 13-member panel met, and they looked at every aspect of this project, and they came back with tweaks to the mitigation plan, recommendations, all of which were incorporated into the plan. Then you also have the county groundwater ordinance. So this was pre-SGMA, and even under SGMA, because there's really no pumping from this basin, it's considered a low-priority basin not subject to SGMA. Essentially, the county has a groundwater ordinance that says if you propose to extract water, you have to do a groundwater management plan. And so Cadiz and Santa Margarita put together this plan with input from the county, and it was approved a few months later. So this groundwater management plan, if any of you are doing SGMA work or looking for a groundwater management program, this is, I think, a really good place to start. It's really the most robust groundwater management plan that I've ever seen. There's all types of monitoring features to determine if there's going to be any impacts on water quality, springs, subsidence. So right now what's going on is all of these different monitoring features are in place, and so they're taking baseline measurements to determine what will happen when pumping actually starts. In addition, there's various action triggers that will be identified. So for example, if the drawdown is happening faster than the model predicted, or for example, a nearby spring is showing impacts from the pumping, the project will be shut down by the county. So there's a very kind of large overview of oversight. So contrary to what a lot of the project proponents are saying, you know, this project is not some free-for-all, it's done in a highly regulated environment. So I told Doug I would try to be balanced and kind of walk through some of the claims by the opponents. And the two main opponents are the Centers for Biological Diversity and Tetra Technologies, which is a salt mining company. They're mining salt on the dry lakes. Some of the key environmental concerns were the impacts on the vegetation and the animals out in the desert, kit fox, tortoise, et cetera, and impacts on springs in the nearby mountains, and impacts on air quality. So each of these items was studied extensively. We incorporated all the comments from the project opponents into the report. What the modeling demonstrated was that the closest spring was about 11 miles away and was completely unconnected to the groundwater where the water will be pumped from. Regarding the air quality, CBD was concerned about dust. If you guys know anything about what happens with Owens Valley and Los Angeles, you know that's a valid concern. And so we had all types of air quality and soil experts go out there to the dry lakes and look at the soil chemistry, which is really different than what we see at Owens Valley. There's a lot of sodium chloride, which creates a very hard crust. And then the last piece was concerns on impacts to plants and animals. So this groundwater is actually between 400 and 700 feet below the ground surface. And so the study showed that there are no plants or animals currently relying on this very deep groundwater. So these parties challenged the cases in court, and I defended the projects both at the trial court level and the appellate court. Both courts found there was no scientific deficiencies in the documents. They found the projects complied with California law. Now, I do a lot of CEQA litigation, and it's very rare that we make it out unscathed. Usually what happens is, you know, opponents bring 30 or 40 claims against you, and usually one of them does stick, and you have to go back and fix something in the EIR. And in this case, there weren't any deficiencies found. So just kind of a list of project benefits. I've always been kind of curious about water economics and not sure what the price of water is today in Colorado, but here's some good comps in California. Now, the price for the Cadiz water is very similar to what we see for other water projects down in Southern California. So the price is between $800 and $1,270 an acre foot. And this is less than desal. It's similar to what we see for these brackish water desalting programs, and pretty close to what we see for MET tier 2 rates. And the metropolitan water, as most of you know, comes from either the Bay Delta or the Colorado River. So it's similar to what we see for imported supplies. Here's some of the other benefits. I think the main one I want to highlight is that what's very important about this project, it's a drought-proof project. And what that means is the project participants, which are public agencies that have signed option agreements with Cadiz to purchase different increments of the supply, will receive this water in a wet or a dry year. So most supplies are influenced by the hydrology, and for example, in certain years, your state water project entitlement may only be 5% of what you've contracted for. So this is a very reliable supply. It is more local than the Bay Delta. And some other benefits really for the region in general is that because this water is so low in TDS and because Colorado River is quite high, so by the time Colorado River water makes it all the way to California, it's picked up a lot of salts and other things. By adding this water to the Colorado River aqueduct, it's really going to have a softening effect on the overall supply. And then, of course, I think the big piece is the storage for imported water. Here are some of the benefits to the economy and job creation. And then this panel really was focused on kind of infrastructure and innovation. And so some things that I wanted to point out is the repurposing of existing infrastructure. So you have both the use of the Colorado River Aqueduct. And right now, the Colorado River Aqueduct has a lot of capacity. So in California, there's a rule that prevents one agency from monopolizing a particular water conveyance system. So Metropolitan Water District actually has to let others utilize their pipeline or aqueduct as long as there's available capacity. So the rule actually provides that if there's capacity, the public agency has to pay what's considered to be the fair market value to utilize that pipeline. And because the Colorado River has obviously also been affected by drought, the Colorado River Aqueduct is projected to not be full in most years. So 9 out of 10 years, this water will be able to move into Southern California. In addition, due to various opponents' claims and whatnot, the Cadiz company, in partnership with the zoo, actually created a 7,000-acre desert tortoise conservation bank, the largest of its kind in California. And they're actually doing some very cool things right now. They're doing a rearing program for these tortoises out there. In addition, some amount of this water is going to be set aside to help disadvantaged communities, which is a big issue in California right now with the movement for the human right to water. Also, green storage, dedication of storage capacity for environmental benefits. So some ideas that the Cadiz and others are exploring right now are, for example, is using the natural gas pipeline to move water down to, for example, the Salton Sea. The Salton Sea, as many of you know, is drying up because farmers are actually more efficient now. So we have this huge inland lake in Southern California that the feds and others are finally paying attention to and trying to restore the Salton Sea. So this water could potentially provide an avenue to bring water to the sea. And then the last part was in-pipe hydropower generation. So the 84-inch pipeline, the 43-mile pipeline I discussed, is going to be outfitted with various turbines to create energy along the way. So I just wanted to end with sort of where we've come and what the next steps are. So as I mentioned, the environmental review period is done. The litigation has been completed. The county has completed the groundwater management plan, and now the initial baseline monitoring is happening out there. And the BLM has decided to allow the use of the railroad right-of-way. Kind of an interesting legal issue, but under the 1875 Act, the federal government granted to railroads the rights to use and construct railroads. And so the legal question here is whether the railroad can lease with a private party to allow them to utilize the right-of-way for other purposes, so like co-location of telecommunication lines, et cetera. There is now some litigation over this issue. CBD has challenged BLM in court and this new policy. This litigation is ongoing. The next piece that needs to be resolved is the Colorado River Aqueduct tie-in. So that's the agreement with Metropolitan that I was discussing. And so Metropolitan will set the terms under which we can send water into their aqueduct. And then the last piece is final design and construction financing. So with that, I think we can expect to see the project built in the next 18 months or so. And I told Doug I spent a lot of time reviewing the science, and it is a very, very sound project. So thank you. So happy to answer any questions.
Good presentation. I'm curious about the importing of water for storage. Colorado's starting to finally, around the state here, we're starting to kind of ramp up with ASR. And one of the concerns is importing water into an aquifer, which you've just described as fairly pristine with very good water quality. So the issue is around compatibility of the imported water to be stored with the native water in the aquifer. And particularly with respect to if treated effluent is used for storage, the incredibly long list of pharmaceuticals and personal care products that occur in that water can't be taken out by sort of conventional treating. So my question is, have you looked at that issue, particularly with respect to persistence of these compounds in the aquifer and long-term toxicity associated with that persistence?
That's a great question. So in California, the Regional Water Quality Control Board will have to issue a permit to recharge any water into this basin. So they will look at all of these issues and set the parameters. Treated effluent in California, and probably here, is moved in separate pipelines. It can't be commingled with potable water. So that probably won't be a water supply that will be added to this basin. Instead, they're looking mainly at flood flows from the State Water Project and sort of Northern California. But yeah, the water quality testing will be a huge component of recharging these basins.
This is not a water issue, but I was curious. Can you elaborate further on that BLM decision you're talking about and what the legal issues are?
Yeah, so in October 2017, the BLM came out with an opinion, and this had been sort of an open issue for a long time. What's actually going on in practice is that railroads are entering into private leases with, for example, telecom companies, and they are allowing them to use their right-of-way for various reasons. And there's basically a split in both state, court, district. Some of these decisions say that because the underlying fee under the right-of-way is owned by the U.S., you have to go to the BLM for approval. So you'd have to pay the BLM to obtain the right-of-way, and then therefore that would trigger NEPA review. So the BLM opinion that recently came out essentially said that you would not need BLM approval for a lease, what they consider to be a private issue. Now, there are also some court cases that essentially say that the other use has to further railroad purposes. So in our case, we're actually selling some percentage of the water to the railroad. And because the railroad has various issues with trestle fires, and they need to utilize some of this water for cleaning their cars, vegetation suppression, et cetera. So this project kind of meets both tests, but this issue is going to be litigated and is very important to telecommunication companies, oil and gas pipelines that are often co-located, and various other issues. So it's really an interesting area of law to watch.
All right, thank you, Amy. Next up is Courtney Hemenway, who is the president of Hemenway Groundwater Engineering, located here in Colorado. I asked around a couple months ago about who's the most knowledgeable guy in Colorado about aquifer storage and recovery, and Courtney's name was the name that came up. To be honest, I think it was the only name that came up. So maybe you're
Very
the only,
limited field.
maybe you're the only one who does it. And I guess that's the other point is there are a lot of places in the West that are further along when it comes to aquifer storage and recovery than we are in Colorado. But it's starting to pick up a lot of interest in Colorado, especially in the southern edge of the Denver metro area. In particular, I hear a lot of people talking about this, where they have some groundwater dependent communities and need to find some solutions to dealing with their water issues, and maybe ASR is one of those issues. So, Courtney?
Good. So I guess my presentation will start off, and I guess, does everybody know the difference between ASR and a managed aquifer recharge? ASR, you know what ASR is and how the difference is? Okay, we'll hit a little bit about that at the very beginning, just to kind of note the differences. And then some of the real differences between traditional storage and ASR storage, aquifer storage and recovery. And then go through one of the case histories, which is the longest one, continuous operating ASR system in Colorado, which we started back in the 90s and has gone on at the Centennial Water and Sanitation District in Highlands Ranch. And then kind of a summary of what the expanded interest in ASR and why those factors are there. The first part about some of the siting issues, all these kind of stuff will lead into that also, but also some of the water that's available now, that's becoming available. So we'll quickly go through what's the difference. It's a specific type. It's through dual purpose wells. We've seen a lot of the recharge basins in a lot of these presentations where they spread it on a basin, it percolates down in. These are actually in wells. We inject in the well and we recover out of the same well. So I did my thesis, and I hate to say this, it was that other school up the road. So I did my master's on that and recharge, and just the operational issues of running spreading basins. There are so many different things on clogging and biologicals and all these different things. You omit 99% of that by going into injection well and recovering out of that. So a lot different than what we call just recharge. When people say recharge, again, a basin versus wells, which we'll be talking about the dual purpose wells. There's a lot of benefits to that from a cost standpoint, especially in the South Metro area. Most of the communities down there are based on the Denver Basin aquifers. They already have capital investment in wells, so they have a lot of money already tied up into their system, into wells. We can now use those for storage devices. So these are actually some graphics that were back in the 90s. My clients use them all the time, so I'm going to use them back. So it's not as great as they could be, but this is it's Centennial, basically just how it goes. We have a surface water source. We go through a limited storage up on the McClellan, goes up to a water treatment plant, treat it to drinking water standards, bring it out to basically storage tanks, and then by gravity we inject into the wells. Biggest thing here, we don't pump it into the wells. We have water levels in the Denver Basin down anywhere from a few hundred feet to 1,800 feet down. We have the opposite problem. We have too much head actually when we drop it down there. You have a 1,500 or 1,800 foot column of water. It produces a lot of pressure, a lot of different things. You can have air entrainment. At the beginning of this, we developed a valve by a local manufacturer to actually put a valve at the bottom, right above the submersible pumps we put in here, in order to break the head. We'll get into a little bit about that. We're actually now, and we've been talking about it, we're actually at CSU now, we're going through green development, green power development. The hydropower that you said and Amy said in her pipeline, we're now doing that on the injection side, being able to generate electricity through the submersible motor and we recover about 60 to 70% of what would be the pumping cost. So again, basically it goes in, oops, sorry, wrong button. Basically goes in, creates a bubble down there. It really doesn't move quickly. It doesn't mix. The water that's, we take treated water, we put it down in there. It flows very slowly. One of the things I always do is kind of a calculation. If 300 feet of screen, we're putting in 300 gallons a minute, 1 gallon a minute going in per foot of screen. If you calculate the velocity at about 12 inches or 18 inches from the well bore, it's actually moving out at about 0.0001 feet per second. Now you go out another foot, it's R squared, R squared, R squared. So it's moving very slowly, so it really doesn't mix. So the water you inject comes back up essentially the same until you get to the mixing front. So if I put in 100 acre feet of water and I pump back about 90, 95, I'm getting just the treated water back. It doesn't mix with the aquifer water. So, and we have really good high quality aquifers anyway, but that's a benefit that it really doesn't mix that well. And one of the formations, the bottom one, which is Laramie Fox Hills, is kind of a stinky one, has some sulfate derivatives in it. It's a great storage location. You can put it in, and if you normally use it as a water supply, it's very difficult to use because of the odor issues and that. But when you put ASR in it, it comes back no odor, no nothing, comes back just the treated water. So till about 90, 95%, and then from 95 to about 105, you get that mixing front. So very efficient storage. When you recover it, it basically, you pump it back up once a little bit. We have a groundwater treatment plant in between where we rechlorinate the water before it gets back into the distribution system, which is by EPA, CDPHE rules. You have to rechlorinate going back in. But that's all. It comes back. You don't have to, no additional treatment other than chlorination. So again, very cost effective. So this is actually treated water storage. And again, that's when you think of the storage, you're not having to retreat it again, all those costs. So again, very efficient storage and a way to use our water optimally through Colorado. And like I said, a diehard native, I hate seeing hundreds of thousands of acre feet of water go down to Nebraska and California, some of those others, that we can do this at. So this is one of the prime ones, and this is an old slide, but it really is the best between ASR, which is injecting into a formation. The real keys are these, and this is why I think we're getting a lot more expanded interest in ASR in Colorado and in other western states because of these factors, the contamination, evaporation, and siting concerns. If you look at, oh, and I put some motion in it because after lunch usually people are falling asleep, so I have some motion so you actually stay awake here. Siting costs, these are critical, and this is really, I think, what's driving a lot of interest in ASR. If you're old like I am, Two Forks in the 80s, it was a project by all the Denver municipalities. They put $40 million in EIS. It got approved locally, went to Washington, and they said, nope, done. So $40 million was spent. Right now, NISP is another one that's out there, Northern Integrated Supply Project. It's the Glade Reservoir and Gallatin Reservoirs up north. Again, they have spent millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars on environmental studies. And from the permitting side, they started in 2004. What I understand, I got off a phone call, that it may be coming out sometime in the next month or two, the draft EIS, which then will go through final approval maybe in 2019 or somewhere in there. So at least 15 years before you either get a yay or a nay on the project, and tens of millions of dollars. I don't know if we're up to 100 million on that. And they may still say goodbye. So again, the concerns of trying to permit it, the EIS, cost and time. Time value of money is another one that I think is a key. When you put in or go for a reservoir, say we get it permitted now, I think NISP was somewhere in the $650 to $1 billion. So when you start that project, you have to bond that out. I start the clock on the money is when that bond goes out, and you're stuck. I look out my window in Parker. I'm at a Parker, and I see Reuter Hess. They had the same thing. They built that $200 million, In the time, that was when Douglas County was one of the first to third fastest growing counties in the nation. Parker was putting in 2,000 plus taps a year. They said they could build that with 600 taps or less, or 600 down to 600, and they still fine. They got it, I think, approved and bonded in 2007. If everybody knows what happened in 2008, Parker went down, I think, in 2009 to 50 taps. So, but you've already bonded out your $200 million. What do you do? What do you do? You don't have any options. So the time value of money, you're having to pay that off. With ASR, you can do it incrementally over time. And I kid that if I did ASR for Reuter Hess, they got $200 million. I could develop the same storage over about 20 years and still have $200 million in my pocket with the amount going. And if social, economic things change, I'm not stuck with a bond for $200 million. I can stop the development. I don't have to put in wells this year. So again, it offers a lot more flexibility economically. And if you can defer money spent, it's huge savings. If you can defer a payment 5 years or 10 years, it's huge savings from an economic standpoint. The other is just a loss of surface area and stream sections. If you put something on a river or anything like that, people are going to protest. They don't like it, taking out river sections. With ASR, I fully confess that the recreational opportunities on an ASR well are nil. You can't boat on it. You can't fish in it. You can't do anything, well, hopefully not fish in it. So again, you don't have those as opposed to a surface water one. The other one that comes up a lot is contamination. Don't think about that a lot. Chemical, if you have the gas truck that falls over in Poudre Canyon and now suddenly contaminates whatever, or any of the reservoirs, okay, that's a minimal risk. What's more, what we found is sediments from fires. The Hemenway fire, there was years back, after the runoff came in, there was huge amounts of fire residue and sediments that came in. Fort Collins and the Poudre, after the fires up there, had huge amounts of sediments coming into the surface water. That wreaks havoc on your storage and your treatment. So again, when we store it underground, we don't have those. You don't have the problems with that. Another one which we're finding too down in South Metro and some of the surface water, we're having a lot more algae blooms in the surface water. That is reducing our capacity through the treatment plants by up to 20%. So you don't have that when you put it underground. You don't have the algae blooms. You don't have those treatment problems. It's already treated, and you just have to rechlorinate it. Excuse me. Other, which I think is key, when I look at all these spreading basins and the evaporation losses, we lose about 3 to 4 feet per year here on surface water. This is in Denver area. If we go in the south east corner, it's even higher than that. So we lose 3 to 4 feet of evaporation on surface water bodies. So what I like to try and do is see what that really means. The Reuter Hess, the reservoir down in Parker, 72,000 acre foot capacity. It has a surface area of 1,250 acres. At 4 feet of evaporation, that's 5,000 acre feet of evaporation per year. I think Parker's full demand is about 9,000 acre feet to meet their demands. This is adding about 50% onto their demand just to meet evaporative losses. And we're talking about the cost of water rights. Here, if you bought the water rights to replace that, water rights in the Denver area, around about $25,000 an acre foot. That's on a one-time basis, one-time cost. If you have 5,000 acre feet of evaporation, if you want to replace that, it would be $125 million. Not only replacement, I look at it from an entrepreneurial standpoint or water use. What if I didn't have that and I could sell that 5,000 acre feet of water that would have evaporated? It's worth $125 million. Not a bad investment, plus uses our resources 100% beneficial, not losing a lot non-beneficial use. So it's significant what our losses are. When you look at some of the reservoirs that are proposed, they're going to be even higher than this. So again, these are real key issues to why ASR is becoming more important. You don't have $125 million worth of losses. And again, contamination, all these different factors. So I pulled this off Denver's site, Denver Waters. website, they are investigating ASR. The key is they agree. Oops, keep doing that. ASR has an advantage over traditional surface reservoir water storage as it tends to be comparatively less costly, has no evaporation, has a lower impact to communities and the environment, and has fewer permitting challenges. They agree. But it's real hard, and what people ask, why isn't this caught on and we've done this? It's really a mindset. When they can see the water in the reservoir, peaceful night's sleep. If it's underground and you can't see it and you think it's going to run away to Kansas or wherever, it just sends nightmares to them. So just to give you an idea, in the Denver Basin, the water travels about 50 feet per year. So if you put water in a well and don't touch it, in 10 years it's only gone 500 feet. So it's not going to run away to Kansas or anybody else. So again, on the permitting side too, and I can't remember if I touched on that. On the permitting side, I can get an ASR well, although we're having a few more issues now with some water quality things, normally in a couple months and for $5,000 to $10,000. Equate that to 15 years and $10 million with no guarantee for permitting. So again, very cost effective, a lot less risk. So this was, somebody who actually participated in this was a statewide recharge. This was a report done in 2004, and they identified bedrock aquifers and alluvial aquifers around the state. Just to give you an idea of the storage capabilities that we have in the state right now. This is without building a reservoir. This is what, if we just put wells in and inject, if we have the water, what kind of numbers we're looking at. These are, there are actually 29 different basins, and these are the bedrock or consolidated ones. I didn't even put up the alluvial ones. Excuse me. And this is the Denver Basin one where we're at. But there are 29 different basins. They ranked them and what kind of numbers they are. And I actually tend to disagree with these numbers. I think looking at how the numbers will come up, address some of those. I think they're an order of magnitude or two off, higher, because of the way the methodology on this. But it gives you an idea. In the High Plains Aquifer, these are 95 million acre-feet of storage. Not bad. In the Denver Basin, the Dawson, 5 million. And again, I think that's off by an order of magnitude or more. The Laramie Fox was at times it's 1 million. Here's 590,000 in the Arapahoe. Just to give you an idea, and I think my numbers are fairly close on Denver Water, their vaunted storage is about 400,000 acre-feet of storage in their surface water system. 400,000. Again, no evaporation, no losses at all. You're in the hundreds of millions to millions of acre-feet of storage available with no evaporative losses, no contamination problems. It's becoming very apparent that this becomes a viable option, as what was put on Denver's website, although they have some political things and different things that come into their decision making. But again, just give you an idea, this is just in the basins in Colorado that all we have to do is permit them, put wells in, and start injection. Now, we are using treated water in these, and we'll get to one of the questions about mixing and different things and water quality that came up. So just give you an idea, is it feasible? These are the questions that usually come up. It's been tried in other aquifers, but it's untested in the Denver Basin. That is untrue. We have been doing it for 23 years in the Denver Basin, down at Centennial, very successfully. Another one, can it be implemented on a large scale? Yes, we have, which we'll see, 25 wells already operating in one district. I have 36 or 38 wells already operating in Colorado with ASR right now. So it can be on a large scale. What about water quality, mixing surface and native groundwater? We are using treated potable water in this. And some of those issues about pharmaceuticals, some of the new things that are coming up, nitrosamines in water, there are some other chemicals of concern that are coming up. What we've found is that a lot of those are treated underground. And when we started in Highlands Ranch in 92, 3, on the testing phase, we were actually part of an AWWA Research Foundation grant that looked at disinfection byproducts. At that point, it was chlorine and the haloacetic acids, trihalomethanes. And what we found was it's treated in the aquifer. The naturally occurring bacteria and the geology removed it. And also when you brought it back up to rechlorinate, the formation potential was gone. We think that's because the total organic carbons are missing when we come back up, which is one of the precursor for the disinfection byproducts. So we think a lot of these things, the pharmaceuticals and some of those things that are coming in, we think will be treated in the same method underground. So some of those concerns are actually mitigated by putting it underground for storage. So again, we've addressed that. The other one, you're probably not old enough, most. When they were injecting at the Rocky Mountain Arsenal, they were putting contaminants down 25,000 feet into a dry faulted formation. It lubricated the faults. When I was a young man, those earthquakes were there, and they were amazingly stopped after they did the injection because they were lubricating a fault. We don't have that in the Denver Basin or these basins because they're already water wet formations, so you're not lubricating a dry formation. So we don't have those problems. That and the recreational user, these are the questions I get on ASR. So quickly, this is where the Denver Basin is. It goes from about Greeley down to Colorado Springs, Lyman to the Front Range. There are 4 principal aquifers stacked on top of each other, the Dawson, Denver, Arapahoe, and Laramie Fox Hill. So we have 4 different aquifers that comprise the Denver Basin. How much water is in there? And I think Amy was saying in her basin you were 34 million or something. We're bigger in Colorado. We have 250 to 300 million in the Denver Basin. That's one of the latest estimates of how much water is in the Denver Basin right now. I've done some numbers too in Douglas County where I live. There's 40 million acre feet if you really calculate the area and the different formations. So if you look at that, Douglas County currently uses about 27,000 acre feet per year. At full build out, when everything is platted, built, the demand is going to be about 130,000 acre feet. Divide 130,000 into 40 million. How long would that last? It's a long time. So again, some of these things about the Denver Basin going away and all that kind of stuff, but it also can be recharged with the ASR technology. So we'll get into a little bit. Highlands Ranch, it's basically, or the Centennial District is Highlands Ranch, South Metro area. There's a population of 95,000 served by it. It's in the South Metro area, comprised about 26,000 acres. The bottom half is all open space, left for, paths and all sorts of stuff. So it's basically a conjunctive use system. They have a rock solid system. Even in the 2000, we heard this morning, in 2000, 2001 drought, Denver, Aurora were actually starting to get down on their end of storage. Highlands Ranch was in really good position. They had surface water in McClellan and others, and then they also had their groundwater. They made it through that period without hardly blinking. So they had a very good rock solid one. The drought really didn't impact them nearly as much as some of the other communities who were solely on surface water. So they use ASR in their field. Quickly go through some of these. This is really what you're looking at. This is the runoff. We have a snowpack, we have a runoff, we have a tremendous amount of runoff, and here's our demand curve. In July, June, July, August, we're about 3 times what our wintertime demand is. So in this period, if you can capture that, that's what you can store in the ground. What I find the hardest thing to do is convince water managers to drain their reservoirs over the winter. Again, nightmares happen. Why would I do that? Well, you're only moving it to a different storage location. What happens now when the spring runoff comes? I have a bucket that's open. Most of the people, like if you look around right now, all the reservoirs are filled because of the wet years we've had. There's no capture availability. So that's why in the last several years, I think last year we had 100,000 acre feet of water go to Nebraska. We didn't have buckets open. If you open the bucket, you can collect more. And if the drought happens and we don't have any water coming in, we still have the water. It's just in a different bucket. So I have a lot of time convincing people that you want to drain your bucket in the winter. We also have water treatment plants. Aurora, I'll just let you know, has 3 different treatment plants. In the summertime, they operate all 3. In the wintertime, they shut 2 down because of the difference between summer and winter demands. If we were able to open one of those up, 2 of those up, have all 3 of them operating, we could be storing a huge amount of water during those off-peak times, further utilizing the capital investment we have in water treatment plants. So quickly going on, basically, you don't need firm. In fact, it's good to use interruptible for ASR. It's very flexible. So, and then again, any recharge helps offset withdrawals in the Denver Basin. This is the hard permitting that you have to go through. This is basically applying for a rule authorization through the EPA. The injection is through the EPA. The recovery is through the state engineer, and that's it on the permitting side. So very quick, these can be done in a matter of months and for $5,000 to $10,000. And every time once you get a rule authorization, you can just add wells to this system. If you have any changes, you just have to note those. So again, remember, hundreds of millions of dollars in 15 years versus $10,000 in a couple months. So why they do it, some of these reasons. Basically, I've gone over a lot of those. Here's the treatment plant. So all their injection water at Highlands Ranch comes from the Blake treatment plant. We actually have one well that's located right here on site. What we're exploring too is the ability to put several wells around here, inject short pipelines, very cost effective, and then putting it, when we pump it back, since we don't have to treat it, we can put it in the back side of the treatment plant on the chlorination side. So when they have an algae bloom in the reservoir over here in McClellan that's reducing them by 20%, we now can put back water to make that 20% back up by directly pumping into the chlorination basins in the back side of the plant. So again, it helps out. That will help defer a water treatment plant expansion or replacement, which if you can hold off $20 million for another 10 years, saves huge amounts of money. So basically all the things talked about. This really is saying if I have a well with an annual appropriation of 100 acre feet and I've pumped it, and by September I've used my annual appropriation of 100, now by ASR I can keep pumping because I've stored water down there. So for Centennial, in those times where they have wells that pump beyond or pump more at a rate higher than 24/7, 365 to get their annual appropriation, they can pump it back and extend their pumping by recovering their injected water. So their sources, they have several sources. Now the Chatfield reallocation, McClellan, all sorts of different injection water sources. They have 54 wells back there, 25 are permitted for ASR. We have 5 MGD capacity in those wells. So I always do that, think about what a 2 or 4 MGD tank looks like. We can put in 5 MGD in one day in the field, and that's treated water. We did the feasibility back then. We're injecting in 3 different formations, and we haven't seen any capacity drop in the wells over the 23 years we've been operating. This is kind of their history, the conjunctive use, groundwater, and surface water over the years. Right now we have 14,000 acre feet of water stored under Highlands Ranch. That's about 1 year's supply for Highlands Ranch. So again, we have, if everything goes wrong, whatever, we have at least 1 year of storage available under Highlands Ranch. Again, current projects that are going, Centennial, which has been 23 years, Colorado Springs, Consolidated Mutual, Castle Rock, these are all ones that are in various, have been operating over various years. Ones that are coming up, Denver Water's exploring it. I'm currently involved with these 2, Meridian, Rangeview, Inverness, Cottonwood, Aurora. These are all South Metro entities. The main reason why is Wise Water. How many know Wise Water? Yeah, so water infrastructure supply efficiency. Did I get that right? I always use the acronym, but I think. That's the project by Denver and Aurora. They bring it back up. It takes the reusable water, because trans-basin water we can use to extinction. That goes through the Metro plant. It's collected in Brighton through alluvial wells and some alluvial treatment there. It goes back up through the Aurora system. and that is now pumped to the South Metro water supply entities, 14 different entities that are using that reclaimed water. Over 10 years, there's going to be 100,000 acre-feet of water available to those communities. It's highly treated water. You don't want to put it into a reservoir, because if you put it in a reservoir, you're going to evaporate it, and you're also going to have to retreat it. So the cost is pretty expensive on it. So you don't want to retreat it. So again, many of these communities are coming on off-peak times. If water comes off-peak time, what are we going to do with it? So they're looking at ASR off-peak time. We'll store it underground. So we're getting a lot more interest because of the WISE project. The other is we developed the rules in 1995 for Denver Basin. Part of that, we made it very flexible to do ASR. They're blue and green water down there. It's solely accounting. You can say whichever water you're pumping back, even though technically you're pumping back your injected water. You can claim whichever one. We made it just an accounting. What happened, Representative Arndt from Fort Collins put together a bill very similar to what I put together back in 95, which said state engineer promulgate rules and regulations now for statewide, because this was only for the Denver Basin. We're now going statewide non-tributary aquifers. So we just came up with those. We went before the hearing officers. Those should be coming out shortly. So we'll have rules for the state to do ASR. So I know communities up north that are looking at it and exploring ASR. And so that will help out, because we're now going any non-tributary one, not just the Denver Basin. One that just passed this last legislative session is to do the same thing, but now for all the designated basins that we have. So we're going to be doing that now too. Those will be coming up probably over the next year. We'll have them basically for anywhere in the state you can do ASR. We'll have the rules in place. Benefits, basically maintains groundwater levels. This is one term I hear, non-renewable Denver Basin. Let's say I'm putting 14,000, I'm putting water back in. Isn't that renewable? I think so. But not naturally, I guess. That's the key. It's not naturally being renewed, but we can renew it. If we had, remember those numbers of millions of acre-feet of storage? If we had the water, we could put it there, make them very renewable. Optimizes Colorado's resources, again, by collecting that water, not letting it go down to the lower basin states. We can capture it and use it ourselves. Environmentally acceptable. I have gone before all sorts of bodies, and it's a white hat issue. Very little environmental issues that come up that people can throw sticks at. So I'll stand before anybody and we can see what environmental problems. We don't get the protests, which are kind of nice. Increases operational flexibility, cost-effective storage. Again, the cost is incredibly less. For NISP, I know there was a thesis or a dissertation done at CSU where utilizing ASR and all this stuff was about 10% the cost of NISP by doing ASR. So again, those are some numbers that, even if that was off by 50%, we're still a lot cheaper. So the other is green energy. We're actually doing that where when we inject, we're actually going to generate electricity, and that becomes green energy, hydropower, and saves about 60 to 70% of our pumping costs. With that, any questions? Whoa. I get one question. Who? Either or. Oh, somebody over there. Mm-hmm. Basically, it becomes economic. You can do it anywhere. It's, if you put in a well that's only going to produce 500 gallons a minute or 400 gallons or 300 gallons a minute, or if you could put it in a location where you can pump back 700 gallons a minute, I'd put it in the 700 gallon minute. You get more water, in that well. So you can put it in anywhere. It just becomes economics, where there are better portions of the aquifer, but like in the metro or the Douglas County area, we can put about anything down there. And they already have existing wells. So we're just retrofitting an existing well. It may cost anywhere from $75,000 to $100,000 to retrofit an existing well to have everything you need, the valving, the controls, to do it. So most of Douglas County is all in wells anyway. We just use those existing wells. But if you're in a new area, you just go to the highest producing part of it and locate the well there.
Good. Fantastic.
I'll be around afterwards for questions if you.
Thank you.
Owen. Oh, yeah. We're in Vegas next week on Sunday.
All right, moving on. Next is Stephanie, is it Pinceti? Pinceti, who is the director of the California Center for Sustainable Communities, which is at UCLA. And her work focuses on the relationship between cities and natural resources, and the, how cities in the region can put the stress they put on natural resources, often distant resources, and certainly that's often the case with water. LA is strikes me as a perfect base for this sort of work. A couple months ago, I was reading an article, and it said there's a very, conceptually at least, it would be possible for LA to survive on no imported water if the local water was managed very strategically. And I don't know if that was accurate. I don't know if that's was overselling the issue. I know that it's certainly sounds like an attractive prospect for those of us upstream to think of LA, not needing imported water anymore. But in any case, it's the sort of thinking that I think is needed in the basin. And so I'm eager to hear what Stephanie has to say about it. Stephanie?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this extraordinary conference. I think I should attend it every year now. I've learned an enormous amount, but in prefacing my remarks, I have to tell you I'm not a lawyer. I don't work in the same way on water that most of the people here work on water, and I'm not an engineer. So what I'm going to present is really 10 years of work that has been put together by ecologists who work on urban ecosystems and water use by plants in urban areas, specifically Los Angeles. People who work on systems engineering approaches to water and engineers, policy people, and a little bit of blue sky thinking. So we endeavored to try to really unpack the water system in LA. And I will not go into the kind of detail that you've heard with other presentations because there's so much to talk about in specific in LA that we could probably be here until 6 or 7 tonight. So what I'm going to do is give you a kind of high-level insight into our work, and we have lots of papers that I would be very, very happy to send you if you would like to know more specific detail. So the other thing is, of course, this is a highly complex urban system, and we have not really talked about urban systems thus far, although water supports them all. So with that, we know that Los Angeles, as we just heard, is the quintessential poster child of it's a desert, which it is not. It should have never been built there. We hear that a lot. It's like I say, well, should New York be built where New York is? You have to import, fuels to heat it. Should it not? Should it just use wood? I mean, what's the thing? LA people are water hogs. They have pools. They steal our water. Wherever the place it's stealing the water from might be. So Northern California, the Owens Valley, Colorado, and of course it's unsustainable. So I am going to try to debunk most of these. So what's the situation? Well, we know that there's highly variable interannual precipitation in the state, but also locally. Highly variable precipitation within the region, from 15 inches in the coastal plain to 32 in the mountains. And then if you go over to the desert side, it's probably much less. And it has some of the highest rainfall intensities in the continental United States, which is one of the reasons the Los Angeles River was channelized, right? Because it flooded dramatically. So it varies from very dry, like the past 4 years, to flooding, to everything in between. highly engineered in the basin to shunt the stormwater out to sea and prevent flooding. There are lots of check dams along the mountains. Remember, Los Angeles is really surrounded by national forest. Mountains that go up to 10,000, 11,000 feet. There's snowfall up there, less and less as the climate changes. But it really is a very variable and very steep kind of topography. William McPhee has written some very nice work on LA, the LA region. And we have vast adjudicated groundwater resources. Unlike the rest of the state, our groundwater basins, the 5 major ones with lots of little subbasins inside of them, are adjudicated. And I will talk more about that. So, as many people have mentioned, we are going to have, the climate is going to change. We're already seeing reduced snowpack in the Sierra Nevada, impacting reservoir infrastructure and management. Those reservoirs were built to capture melting snowpack, not floods of rain, and to release them slowly into this incredibly engineered, probably one of the highest engineered water systems until China built its canal to Beijing, in the world. So that is actually was predicated on science in the early 20th century, right? Mid-20th century, about how much snow there would be and so on and so forth. And that world has completely changed. So dam management is predicated on being able to release that water for beneficial use downstream over a long period of time. But as we saw with Oroville Dam, that it overtopped, all that water just goes out the river to the ocean through the delta, and it's a very fragile and unstable system at this point. We will probably, we don't know if we're going to get less precipitation overall. That's still an open question. But what we do know is we'll have hotter, drier periods and higher intensity rainfall. So the question really is for that water system, how do we now manage going forward with capturing the water that will fall and not completely damage the water's conveyance systems that exist, but also figure out ways of that water being able to be reinfiltrated or reused. But the current system is not engineered to do so. So I think I mentioned most of this already. We don't have the capacity for long-term year-over-year storage. So I think some of the discussion about stormwater and infiltration is very, very critical. There are experiments going on in the Central Valley for flood irrigation in the winter of nut crops and other kinds of land uses. Of course, we engineered most of the ability of the water to go flood the Central Valley out because we wanted to use that land productively, and now we're in the paradoxical situation of realizing that if you don't fill those groundwater basins with the water that exists, there's less and less of it as we continue to pump it out. So we also have a hardening of Central Valley agricultural water needs with crop shifts to nuts, which means that in the wintertime, if you could have fallowed land to flood in the winter, it's very difficult, and we need to know how much flooding nut crops can take. Walnuts can take quite a bit, pistachios, I don't know. And we still import 58% of our water from Northern California and the Colorado River, sold by the Southern California Metropolitan Water District, of whom we've heard about earlier. So just for those of you who don't know this map, you can see that the conveyance systems are very, very long, and there's a lot of evapotranspiration, all the problems that we have talked about, in addition to which the California aqueduct is bisected by very serious earthquake faults. So if there's a big earthquake, not just in the San Francisco Bay Delta area, but along the way, it really raises some very serious problems for the metropolitan region that is in the south. So what we have, since I'm a social scientist type, I like to describe this as in a very friendly way. It's a historically accreted modernist socio-technical system, right? There are pieces upon pieces upon pieces upon pieces, and it's really a very good example of modernist thinking. We are going to apply the best science and the best engineering and create this fantastic system that is going to be engineered for vulnerability, engineered for risk, and will allow continued growth. So it was based on this idea of meeting water needs infinitely, and so it's very interesting to hear the discussion about Cadiz, and that it's the Santa Margarita Ranch Company that is going to be the water, I've forgotten the term, the client or whatever, the entity under which the permit is coming in. Because Santa Margarita in Orange County is continuing to build houses, right? So the growth machine in Southern California continues to try to find ways to supply itself, and water supply needs to be shown for urbanization to continue under state law. So that, I think, is an interesting insight there. So the other thing is the State Water Project, and I think it was implied in the earlier talk, and river water flows are way over allocated. And it's this haunting problem that people who are in the know realize, but it's very hard to unravel your water allocations after you've actually predicated your whole system on people buying in under the amount of water that you said you're going to be able to provide. We have the archaic separation of surface and groundwater rights and then absence of implemented state-level groundwater regulation. And so it prevents conjunctive use schemes like water banking and other things like we've heard earlier today. So the groundwater management agencies, or whatever they're going to become, are being created, and we heard about that earlier, so I won't repeat that. But what is interesting in the work that we've done in Los Angeles County is that we have finally mapped all of the water retailers in the county. And in the basin area, if you look at our UCLA Water Hub, you'll be able to see an interactive map of the 100 different retailers, public, private, and nonprofit, of different sizes that provide water that they buy from the Metropolitan Water District at different water prices to their clients. And that in itself is a kind of extraordinary situation, I think. You know, over time, as the area urbanized, water districts, water retailers, public, private, and nonprofit were created. There are 228 in the whole county, not counting the little ones. So think about how you manage your water going forward in periods of unknowable, really, water availability over time. And when you have all of these water retailers, think about how you figure out how to pay for infrastructure, repairs, and leaky infrastructure. Think about how you implement water conservation programs. Think about how you measure and report the amount of water being used in the metropolitan area. These are very, very important issues if you want to manage your region to use less water over time, which can be done. So 38% of county water is from groundwater, but it's restricted to about 300 rights holders, some very small ones like cemetery districts and school districts. Those are becoming more and more publicly owned. We did a study looking at water rights holders change over time. But still, with 38% of the water coming from groundwater, but only 300 rights holders, you begin to, it begins to challenge your imagination about what might be interesting going forward. And we have a traditional siloed water system, like everywhere, with the stormwater agencies and wastewater agencies and groundwater basin managed by groundwater masters, which have different adjudications, and you dig into those adjudications, and they're quite interesting how they evolved. Eleanor Ostrom's dissertation was about that, and then all this imported water. So this gives you, we actually mapped all of the water, the 100 water delivery entities, where they're getting their water. Let's see, right here, from a MET member, from a basin, from a water source, a city, the MET members, the municipal water districts, the mutual water companies. We wrote a very nice paper that describes this very bewildering system that works. I mean, people turn on their tap and they get perfectly drinkable water. They actually do. So you begin to think, well, maybe. And then the groundwater basins, there are 5 major ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the years of adjudication. As someone mentioned earlier, these take a really long time, and they're very expensive. And when you read the adjudications, you see that the same people, just the same lawyers, basically move from basin to basin to help facilitate the discussion around how to share this water. And the trouble is, of course, how do you then change those adjudications going forward to meet modern issues when it takes so much time and so much money, right, to do it? People are very reluctant to change anything because the adjudications were such a painful effort. So you can see here we did a lot of analysis about pumping rights by cities and the different amount, of water, that cities can get. It's very, very variable according to where you are and according to your historical. Although the city of LA gets all of its own groundwater under the law of what was that? I can't remember. It was under Spanish water rights and Mexican water rights. Sorry, they get all their water. But you can see that even though you have this huge resource, it's fairly exclusive. So there are 88 incorporated cities, 67 in the county urbanized basin area. 45 of them have adjudicated groundwater rights, and there's 1 unincorporated city. And then you can see how we've mapped all of these different ways of looking at water, since water is divided into all these different kinds of categories. I've threatened to write one of those ABCD dictionaries with A, adjudication, and then all of the terms under A that apply to water, and all the terms of B, and then you think, wait a minute, are we talking about water, or are we talking about something else? Pumped water, return flow water, there's just this incredible vocabulary around water that enforces this kind of separation in our heads about what we're talking about, and I think that's an important thing to think about. We have a 1.6. We use about 1.6 million acres of water a year, and this is a really complex system that's highly siloed. And so, in a sense, it's like, how much water is there out there, right? So I had this really wonderful systems engineer develop a integrated model, a network model of all. It's called ARTES. It's open source. You can use it to begin to. He tracked all of the water flows. So anywhere from how much water was treated in a sewage treatment plant to all of the water that comes into LA to all the storm water. It is a comprehensive systems model of all of the water in LA County. And we began to play with that to see what would be possible in terms of water self-reliance. So one of the most interesting things that I think people are beginning to realize in LA County is that there is up to 850,000 acre feet of space that's dewatered among the among the groundwater basins, and that is utilizable. Doesn't have salt intrusion, it hasn't been subsided. It simply, under the adjudications, didn't exist somehow. Now, why that is, I'm not a groundwater expert, I don't know, but that is being eyed as a potential additional water storage. We could also capture up to 630 acre feet a year of stormwater, and recycled wastewater resources could consist of at least 528 million gallons MGD currently, and that's not even pushing it. So when you begin to look at this, you start to think, well, wait a minute, maybe we just haven't been thinking about possible local water supply very carefully, right? We've assumed that we can continue to import the water and we don't have to do very much to better maximize the amount of water that exists or potentially exists in LA County itself. Now, under the, oops, I'm sorry, I did that again. This is a big issue because under the adjudications, if we were to capture more stormwater and infiltrate it into those groundwater basins, who does it belong to? Because that water is already owned in there, and the space that exists doesn't belong to anybody. And under the adjudications, stormwater is considered natural water. That's not part of the virgin water of the basins or the water that traditionally has been imported, bought from MWD to keep those basins at sustained yield. Quite a conundrum, right? So do we reopen all of those adjudications to figure out what happens to the water there? That's an issue going forward that I don't think there's been enough regional discussion around, and there's a lot of fear around reopening those adjudications, as one can imagine, right? But that's a potential huge amount of water. So we've estimated that if the groundwater basins were rewatered to their capacity, domestic GPCD was reduced to 75 gallons per person per day. Outdoor landscaping, and these two are coupled very tightly, was shifted to dry weather planting. I mean, we have planting that is fine for the northeast of the United States, but not great for the south, for Mediterranean climate. We captured more stormwater in rainy years. Sanitation water was recycled for potable use or injected into groundwater. That LA County could get very close to being water self-reliant, especially if in years of very, very high rainfall in the state, which will happen, right? It's not like it's going to be dry forever. We could import water in those years. Lots of water. Resupply all of those groundwater basins, make sure all the reservoirs are topped up. It's a scary way to go about managing your water, but it's a pretty scary way to go about managing your water now, right? So I argue that actually the problem is not that there's no water. The problem is that we've engineered it out of use. We've adjudicated and regulated it out of being able to be used. And so in a lot of ways, we have institutional infrastructure and behavioral reforms that are required. Do we all really need a lawn? Does the lawn, is it an indispensable part of urban life? Especially if the water you put on your lawn is the water you will not be able to drink. You don't quite think of it that way yet. And I think that this is, I'm sure, probably legally impossible, but those groundwater basins should be common pool resources. They can no longer be managed if we're really concerned about climate change impacts on water availability in the future and so many people living in this region. They can't be managed the way they are anymore. It is a recipe for shortage. It's a recipe for not being able to address the need for fair distribution of water across the region. More public lands for stormwater capture. We did a lot of work on the potential for stormwater capture on public lands, including using a lot of the stormwater conveyance systems for more groundwater capture, things like that. There's a lot of room for more stormwater capture. Of course, transforming urban landscapes, that will probably take 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. The nursery industry is completely unprepared for doing that. The agencies have not really kept up the drumbeat and the financing for turf replacement. MWD provided $350 million 1 year for turf replacement, which is, if you looked at MWD territory, you realize what a silly, trite amount of money that is. This year it's $50 million, so good luck for the whole territory. Changing indoor appliances, of course, there's still work to be done there, but I would argue that's probably the least effective way to get to water self-reliance. And of course, transcending these jurisdictional and boundaries and institutional fragmentation. And one should try to imagine in the basin, a big group of these water managers coming together year after year, week after week, to figure it out. And JPAs are possible. There have been JPAs before. There's all kinds of institutional mechanisms that we could begin to implement, but there's not much leadership. So a One Water future is the pathway to climate resilience for the county and towards water self-reliance. We had lots of funding, and I'm happy to send you any papers on institutional management, on vegetation and water use in the county, on groundwater basins, common pool resources, on we just got a paper published that looks at the cost of water locally and these infrastructure improvements versus importing water through large tunnels that our governor wants to build through the Delta. And then we have a final paper that's under review that's a kind of summary paper. So thank you very much. I hope this was interesting, if not as precisely detailed as it might have been.
Why don't you take a couple questions?
Sure.
Stephanie, that was great.
Thank you.
And it really ties in. I'm getting to the conference late today, and I agree with you 100%. This is one of the best conferences in Boulder every year. So thank you all.
Yes.
You're brilliant, and
It's
I mean
incredibly
it to the
fascinating.
core. Okay. Lenny, tying in with your talk, and I came here just at the beginning of the last talk, tying all this in all the way back to water rationing and Lenny's talk, this is really struck with me through the whole conference, is he showed in his graphs how quickly groundwater would recharge if we gave it a break. Remember, we had the economic downturn 2005 to 2008, and boom, the aquifer started to recharge. As an environmental geologist, I do some hydrology work, and I just thought that was one of the most hopeful thing I've heard in a long time. And then later on, we heard that we have like 25, 30 years to maybe do something about recharging our aquifers. Let's take advantage of this climate change, heavy rainfall periods that we're going to be having for recharging. And then all the work that you guys are talking about. This is my plea to, and I am really passionate about this. This is my plea to you guys. This conference is so great every year. Is there a workshop that can follow up from this where we can begin to, talking to another one of my favorite people in the world, can we do some leadership here about creating that sustainable leadership, educating our legislatures with, come here. I'm going to bring you here for one of our Conference on World Affairs talks. So you guys all know where I'm going. I just wanted to throw that out there. I wanted to say thank you to you again, but there's a great opportunity for everybody in this room and the students to collaborate on this one. It's there, the data's there, the fact that if we do the right things, our aquifers and our groundwater areas are going to recharge in a short period of time. We have an opportunity. So if you can comment on that, great, and thank you for the moment.
Professional associations are really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or can be. Somewhat.
So I have a question for you relating to like turf replacement programs, that sort of thing in the LA area. CSU recently did a study that found when xeriscaping's brought into landscapes that have had trees historically that have helped reduce AC usage, that sort of thing, that a lot of the trees end up dying because you're removing the irrigation. And have you looked into tree cover rates in the LA area,
Yeah,
and
sure.
would removal of trees actually impact the energy use, or is it more spread out there where it's not going to impact that a whole lot for AC?
So there are a couple of issues there. One is just because you remove your turf doesn't mean you shouldn't be watering your trees. Our irrigation systems are inappropriately installed so that you can't, if you take out your turf, you no longer have irrigation for your trees, which is really stupid. You can just put in a drip line for your tree and your trees are fine. But it's part of the public education around what a new kind of vegetation, a new kind of landscape. Turf is easy. You just turn on your sprinklers and everything gets sprinkled the same every 2 days for 15 minutes. A different landscape requires different kind of landscaping, a different kind of irrigation system, and different kinds of controls. So you might want to irrigate your tree more than you irrigate other things, right? So it's not, it's a matter of intelligence more than anything else. Yes, trees, there is tree mortality. The other thing is we're not planting trees that are appropriate to the climate, right? So it's a really big package. That is a huge change. You can't underestimate how difficult changing urban landscapes is and will be, and how costly it is, and how little infrastructure there is at any level to help the resident to do that. So thanks, great question. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Stephanie is on our last panel of the day, which is a question and answer panel, so we can ask more questions of her. And I asked her to be in that panel in part because that's a good panel for what you call blue sky thinking, that sort of big thinking. So that will be coming up shortly. Next is Scott Reinert, who's with the El Paso Water Utilities, and he's a hydrogeologist, yet another hydrogeologist here.
Hey, Courtney.
I mean, and you need a hydrogeologist if you're in a water agency like El Paso, because it's completely dependent upon groundwater reserves, which have been dwindling in recent decades, and so it is a good example of a city that got serious about tapping brackish groundwater. So that's what he's going to talk about. Scott?
Thank you. Again, shouts to the Colorado State, right? The Colorado State, and I saw one over there, right? So, well, thank you. So I'm going to talk about El Paso's water supply. I'm going to talk about our desalination plant. It is the largest inland desalination plant in the world. And that is because there are larger desalination plants in the world, but they're located along oceans. Ocean is used as a source of water, and it's also used as the place where they discharge the concentrate. So because El Paso uses deep well injection to manage its concentrate and found a geologically suitable aquifer, or reservoir, I call it, it is able to do this facility. It's a 27 million gallon a day facility, and it was built about 10 years ago. Back about 15, 20 years ago, El Paso, like Doug was mentioning, was looking at its future water supply. It has a very large Army facility there, Fort Bliss, and one of the concerns about BRAC and viability of a military installation is, what is your water supply? So Fort Bliss began contemplating their own 7 million gallon a day plant. El Paso was likewise looking at a 20 million gallon a day plant, and kind of like the Reese's chocolate and the peanut butter colliding, and made a Reese's peanut butter cup. Well, El Paso and Fort Bliss joined together, and he created a single concept of a 27.5 million gallon a day plant. The benefit of their combined collaboration was that they got a large EPA funding, and that really helped build the plant. And then it also made El Paso and Fort Bliss look united in the front of BRAC, which is very aggressive. They want to take bases and move it to the other city. El Paso was managed to keep Fort Bliss in El Paso. So let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk about El Paso's water supply and how we use surface water we use groundwater, and then now we're using desalted groundwater, and that's, we want to maximize our use of surface water when it's available. As we're all talking about, drought occurs, right? More and more. And when drought occurs, that means we have to pump more and more groundwater. And now that we have a desalination plant, it kind of mirrors or kind of dovetails our pumping of groundwater. So I'm talking about our desalination plant, why it was built, where it was built in reference to the brackish water supply that we have. And I'll talk about concentrate management. I gave a presentation a while back, and I talked about concentrate. I probably said concentrate 20 times, and this engineer came up to me afterwards and said, I didn't understand what concentrate meant. So concentrate at a desalination plant is the rejected salts. It's still a liquid form. In our situation in El Paso, concentrate is about half as salty as ocean water. Ocean water is 33 parts per million, about. Our concentrate is 15,000. It's still liquid. And it even looks as clear as that water right here, but definitely you can taste it. And so that's what concentrate is. It is a rejected product, and we use deep well injection to move it out of the way so we can run our plant. Then I'll talk about our plant operation. Over the last 10 years, the plant has been very responsive to a couple of serious drought conditions. And then we had a very interesting weather condition in February of 2011. The city virtually was freezing. I think we had about 48 hours of below freezing, which is very cold for us when you have a frost depth of 1 inch. This disrupted power supply, disrupted water supply, yet the desalination plant was instrumental in the middle of winter to be pulled at full use to provide us the water that we needed. And then I'll talk about some of our future plans. We're already beginning to expand our desalination plant. So I'll start off with our water supply. This is a diagram of the Rio Grande water supply. If it's snowing here in Boulder or Fort Collins or Vail, it doesn't really help the Rio Grande. Now, if it's snowing in Alamosa, Creed, Taos, New Mexico, those kind of areas, that's going to help the snowpack. And the snowpack is vital for the supply of water down at Elephant Butte Reservoir. That reservoir is it's 120 miles away from El Paso, and the reservoir is about 300 miles downstream of all the snowpack. So when we're in El Paso and we talk about a drought, they may say, well, it's only raining 6 inches this year. Well, that's a drought, right? A drought to us is if Elephant Butte doesn't have very much water in it. That's when the water planning groups talk about drought. It means that the reservoir doesn't have enough water. And coincidentally, we're talking about a serious drought coming up for us this next year. The irrigators are virtually draining the lake out, providing a full year of planting this year, but as they do it, it's going to be empty, and even if we get a normal snowpack, we're probably going to have a very limited water supply next year. So that calls in the use of more and more groundwater next year, of which desalted groundwater is how we manage our groundwater. So here's a picture of our aquifers. The yellow one is the Mesilla Bolson, and it supplies the west side of El Paso, it supplies Las Cruces, and even supplies parts of Juarez, Mexico with its water supply. And then the Hueco Bolson, it supplies northeast El Paso, east El Paso, and then all of Juarez uses the Hueco Bolson. Now, like any other aquifer, it doesn't stop at the border, international or state boundary or a county line. These aquifers are both in New Mexico, Texas, and Mexico. Some of the management challenges we have with the Hueco Bolson is water level decline, of which we've been working with an aquifer recharge program, and also salinity increases, and we've addressed some of those with our desalination plant. This is a picture of, it's a bar chart. If you're an engineer, you like to put bar charts and things. This shows the production from the Mesilla Bolson. This is the one that I just showed in yellow, and this supplies West El Paso with its water every year. It doesn't have any surface water supplying that portion of town, so every year, day in and day out, we're pumping about that much water. We've added more customers to West El Paso, but if you look at the use over the last 20 years, we really haven't grown it. And that's because of conservation and use of reclaimed water. So we're basically producing the same amount of water over all those years, but we have more customers. That's the benefits of water management. And so now, as I mentioned, drought is a huge component on how we look at our water supply planning. This is the Rio Grande, and in particular, oops, what did I do? Oh, is there a pointer here?
Yeah,
Oh.
but that's not.
Let's see here. There we go. I'm going to just, the year 2013 is the lowest bar. I'll use the old-fashioned pointer. The lowest bar on there is year 2013. That was the single worst delivery in the history of the Rio Grande project. That was a project built by the Bureau of Reclamation that built the Elephant Butte Reservoir. So in the year 2013, the single worst delivery, we got 10,000 acre feet. I think this next 2019, we may be on the order of 15,000. So when it's that low, we have to pump more and more groundwater. So now we go and we're looking at the Waco Bolson and see the highest line on that chart was the year 2013. See, when river water is limited, guess what? The Waco Bolson is called into action and we pump it. So between the Waco Bolson and the Rio Grande each year, they both equal about the same when you add them up. It's just how much is, who's going to be the dominant leader? Is it the Rio Grande or is it going to be the Waco? So you can see how we manage conjunctively use our surface water and groundwater on this aquifer and the Rio Grande. The other aquifer that I showed for West El Paso, it's not connected, or we don't use river supply on that side of town, so it's every year it's the same. But this one is really reflective, and we like to manage it this way because in the late, look at the left side, you see we're pumping at 70 and 80,000 acre feet a year, and engineers like to draw lines, trends. This trend line will be going up to 200,000 acre feet. If you see where the B on Bolson is, that trend line will be going way up there, and that is clearly not sustainable. We started to see significant water level decline, salinity increases that we didn't like, and so beginning in 1990, we worked on a really serious, aggressive water use plan for the city, which used conservation and reclaimed and additional surface water to help us curtail the reliance on groundwater. So groundwater is very important here, but yet it is a diversified approach that's helping us manage this. In fact, we like to say in 2009, right over here, we were pumping water at a rate not seen since the 1960s in the Waco. So that's what we think is good management for the resource that we have. And then going into the future, the next 50 years, we plan on continuing to use the Waco Bolson, but recognizing that it does have its limits. And as we grow as a city, we need additional external water supplies, which aquifer recharge is an important component for us too. So if we look at a pie chart of our water supply, the Rio Grande is shown there in that lime green. It's a very valuable component. However, in that year of the drought, it was probably 10% of our supply. On a good year, it's about 50%. And the red portion there, the Mesilla Bolson, will stay about the same every year. Okay, so here's our infrastructure. We have over 150 wells in El Paso that bring water to our customers. The yellow ones are the Mesilla. They're run year in and year out the same amount. Then we have the white dots. Those are located along the Rio Grande. Those are our surface water plants. And when water is available, in a full water supply year, we'd have water from March through October. In a drought year, we might have water from June to July. So 6 weeks of water versus 30 weeks. That's what drought means to us in terms of surface water. And then the yellow dot up in the corner there is the desalination plant, which I'm going to start talking about. The plant opened in 2007. It was built to deal with drought. I mentioned the military. That was a huge component of future planning for the military and the city. Emergency situations, I mentioned the freezing weather conditions. One of the drought conditions is in year 2012. The month of May, we ran the plant about 3 weeks at peak capacity. In lieu of having a river supply, we used the desalination plant plus a whole bunch more groundwater pumping. And we're using it for more and more growth as the city is growing. Our production at the desalination plant is increasing. And then the location of the plant helps us manage a brackish water intrusion. I'll show you a slide here where the plant is located at a brackish freshwater interface, and we're using the brackish as a supply. So all the facilities for this desalination plant are located on Fort Bliss. When we were building this, there was many people at the water utilities that thought this will never happen. Fort Bliss barely lets anybody in, and yet we're going to put about $90 million worth of stuff on their property. Somehow it worked out. So we leased the property from the military, and then we sell them water. So here's a picture of that brackish, that's B, and fresh, that's the F. The yellow line is an interface. Eastern El Paso is brackish. It goes from about 3,000 TDS up to water that's about 10,000 TDS. So, but the water that if you look at that black oval area, that's kind of the area we're talking about, right on the interface, and that water is about 3,000 TDS. Here's a picture of a reverse osmosis skid. Those are a whole bunch of membranes. We have over 512 membranes. We have 5 skids. This is one skid that would treat by itself 3.6 MGD it'll treat permeate, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then we have 5 of those skids. This is a more detailed picture of what a membrane is. You're really forcing salty water under high pressure through this pipe. The membrane almost looks like a wax paper. It has a consistency of wax paper that's tightly wound around this center pipe. We have permeate, that's the water that's stripped of salts, goes one way, and the concentrate goes another way. And then the water's treated twice. So the first permeate goes through another treatment, and the concentrate's put in the reject pile, and ultimately we dispose of it. So it's called a 2-pass system. So here's some of the terms that we talk about when we're desalting. And if you're talking about ocean desalting or desalting like we do inland, you're going to see these vocabulary terms. So it's Mike, the dictionary you talked about. Source water, it could be ocean water. In our case, it's brackish groundwater. We will pump that at 18 million gallons a day into the plant through wells that are located around the plant. The quality of that water is 3,000 TDS. So it's like 1/10 as salty as ocean water. So it's a lot less saltier than ocean water. You can barely taste it. You can taste it. It'll clog up your air conditioner if you have those kind of evaporative coolers. The water that's run through the reverse osmosis, the clean stuff stripped of salts, is called a permeate. That will produce, at this full capacity, 15 million gallons a day of permeate, and then we have 100 milligrams per liter. So it's really stripped of salts. You went from 3,000 down to 100. Okay. Now the concentrate, again, is this rejected water, and we produce that at a rate of 3 million gallons a day, and it's 15,000 milligrams per liter. So it's getting salty, half as salty as ocean water. And then we do some magic where we blend the permeate with blend water to kind of actually add salts back to our permeate to make it into a finished water. Our finished water is the water that goes out to the customers, and we want to make sure that our finished water has consistent chemistry in the pipes like all the other water sources that we use. We use groundwater, river water, now desalted water, and we have to be very careful that the chemistry of the finished water matches that, or we'll have another Flint. Nobody wants another Flint. Okay, here's a picture of the infrastructure that we have at the desalination plant. The yellow dots are the source wells. This is where the brackish groundwater is collected. It's brought into the RO plant. The RO plant separates permeate into concentrate. The concentrate, the rejected water, is pumped 22 miles along that pipeline up to the top right up there, that map. That's the injection wells, and that's where it's disposed of. Then the blend well that actually blends water with the permeate to create our finished water, that's those 16 of those blend wells, those purple dots. The concentrate that we dispose of is, we use deep well injection. Our injection wells are 4,000 foot deep. It's in a fractured dolomitic limestone aquifer reservoir where the water flows via gravity. We're not doing a Rocky Mountain arsenal where we're shoving it down and lubricating any fracture zones, and actually operates under vacuum. The water's just kind of sucked in, and we don't use any pumps to force it. And so they're located 22 miles away, very suitable geologic formation. It is, again, very far from our regional aquifer that we use, and it's at a completely different depth, different geologic materials. And the quality of what we're injecting into is 8,000 milligrams per liter. So it's very salty what we're injecting into, and it's virtually unusable now. So it's, in our opinion and the EPA in the state of Texas, it's very suited for deep well injection. One of the challenges, as I mentioned, about desalination, especially inland, is what to do with the concentrate. El Paso has been very fortunate to find deep well injection works. Just as a caveat or a note, we produce 3 million gallons a day of concentrate. A lot of people ask us, well, why don't you use evaporative basins? Okay, you would need 600 acres of land, and if you had $10 a square foot for a liner material, we're talking about $300 million to build evaporative ponding facilities. So makes you really want to think about deep well injection. I know the state of Arizona, Sharon, it's not legal there. It's something they're addressing as they look towards desalination to help them with some of their drought supplies. But something that El Paso's working with, we're very proud of this innovative concept, and it's harvesting the salts that are in the concentrate. You remember I mentioned the concentrate had 15,000 parts in it? Well, there's all kinds of salts in there. And what this technology, it's called EnviroWater Minerals, is planning to do is actually selectively remove these salts and harvest them for marketing. So instead of having a disposal, they have a resource of which they're going to harvest these minerals, sell them to markets, and then the finished water that they get after stripping those salts out, we buy back from them as a permeate, and then we add it to our system. So it's win-win for both of us. Here's a little schematic diagram that shows our plant is shown there on the right, the bigger facility, and that red line is showing concentrate from our facility going to their facility, and the blue line is showing permeate going back to our facility. That's water that we can use to augment what our desalination plant is already doing. And then in the event of any kind of plant shutdown on our end, we have a well that has some salts in it that they can use to kind of keep their facility running. So I mentioned the salts that are in there. Some of the things that they're looking at towards marketing are fertilizers, milk of magnesia, acids for various industrial uses. They even use some of the gypsum for agriculture. They use it to, with soil stability, I think it helps allow water to percolate into the zones better. And so as I mentioned, some of the highlights of our plant operating in the last 10 years is how it responded to the big freeze in 2011, and then especially these drought conditions of May of 2012 when, we're counting on surface water in May, we didn't have it, and we run the plant at full capacity, and it really helps. Still wasn't enough, but we had to pump a lot more groundwater during that time. And then day in and day out, we run the plant at 8 MGD. Okay, over the 10 years, we produced 53,000 acre-feet of finished water, and it's used for peaking. It is more expensive to operate. We've heard that mentioned by people. It does cost more, but it is available for us. It's an emergency situation, growth, disruption of service for whatever reason, the plant could be ramped up. Here's a kind of showing how much water we've produced in it over the last 10 years. It is increasing over the years, but when there's a ample or abundant surface water, like 2009 here on the end, ample surface water, we don't pump as much groundwater, and we don't pump this plant as much. So it is a decision-making process where we say, well, okay, do you really need the water? Well, we have it, but it's going to cost more. We try to manage some of those cost decisions to help our customers out. And as we go into the future, we're looking to increase the capacity by 8 MGD. That would be a few more wells that we would add, and add another RO skid, so we'd have a total of 6 skids. And so it's going to continue to be used in this manner. And that concludes my presentation. Are there any questions?
Yes, that was really interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about the energy source for the plant and issues around the energy intensity of that water?
Energy is quite a factor in the cost of the plant, and it is more expensive. You're running water under 160 psi through a membrane. That's going to cost more than just pulling water out and adding chlorine to it. So it is definitely a factor in how we use the plant. We did an analysis of using solar power to operate the plant, and our analysis, and the way Texas buys back power is punitive. So it wasn't cost favorable for us to do solar. You would think that something that's an energy user like this and the bright sunshine of El Paso, it's a natural for solar, but until the Texas Electric Commission or whatever allows us to sell power when we can, it's not favorable for us right now. We did look into that though. Yes? Oh.
I'm just wondering what sort of filter replacement costs you guys have, because I do want to work with the Anderson here in Denver and Boulder and big cloud for osmosis, and Steinfeld maybe way more water out of here, so we can maybe convert it down and say some put it down now, but in that they talk about the water without using different supply sources. You guys are mainly concerned about the cost, how much that adds to the bottom line. Just wondering what you guys have to spend on that on an annual or basis.
Well, as I mentioned, the plant's been in operation for 10 years. We've gone through a detailed study of membrane replacement. We are looking towards replacing them. Our operators take great pride in how they protect these membranes. They have a cartridge filter. They have a sand strainer at the front end of the plant, 5 microns, and another one that's 50 microns. All the last thing you want going into a membrane is little particles that will mess up your membrane. So they keep all those particulates and anything irregular from coming in. So they've taken great care of that. Another way they operate, I mentioned there's 5 skids. We're typically running 2 skids at a time. So the other 3 are in a state of readiness, but they keep them in a preserved state. So they rotate through all of these. So they keep all of them in operation. But we are looking at replacing the membranes, and with the 12 to 15 years of more technology, we're thinking that we can get better performance. The water quality has decreased. A little more salt is coming into our plant at the front end, so having a more responsive membrane is something favorable to us. So we are looking at that.
Scott, are there oil and gas operations in the vicinity, of El Paso that has produced water that's of a quality that's suitable for treatment in your facility?
No, the nearest oil and gas industry is in Midland, about 300 miles away. Yeah.
What are the difference in cost of water produced by your plant versus water that will be water?
Right. The slide that someone had earlier with those costs, I noticed that ours fit right in there. It's about $1,200 an acre foot for the desalted water. They're all different ways. Are you going to include capital? Is it operating costs? But $1,200 is a reasonable number. I've seen it listed anywhere from $800 to $1,200. Of course, our cheapest is the fresh groundwater that you just add chlorine to. That's what we love to use. We fell in love with that for 80 years. We're having to moderate our love for that a bit. Yeah. Anything else? All right. Thank you.
All right, that's great. All right, we are going to take a break till 3:30, and then we will come back and we'll just have a panel where there will be no more presentations. It'll be questions and primarily questions from the audience. And not only questions, at their final panel is also where you get a chance to make a little speech if you want. If there's something you really want to say, you can phrase it as a question as you want, but you know how it is. But it's the time in the conference for the audience to be more involved and to try to think about big conclusions and big points. So come back for it in a half hour. Thank you.